All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the thesis defense for Mackenzie Warner as part of the Master of Science in Kinesiology for the master's degree of kinesiology at Cal State University, San Marcos. So I am Matt Schubert. I'm the department graduate coordinator. So I'm going to just lay some brief ground rules and housekeeping before I turn it over to the thesis committee chairperson. So the thesis committee for this defense consists of Dr. Sean Newcomer, who is the chair, Dr. Jeff Nessler, and Dr. Davide Filingeri from the University of Southampton over in the UK. So we have a pretty diverse committee here. Now, the way this is going to go is Mackenzie's going to run through her presentation. It's going to take probably about 40 minutes or so. During that time, I'll ask that you hold any questions. You're welcome to type them into the chat while she is presenting, but they will not be addressed until she is finished. When she is done, we will open the presentation up for questions from the general audience. So this is anybody who is not on her committee. That will be your chance to ask questions or have a discussion or dialogue about her results as well as her overall thesis. When there are no more questions from the general audience, we will ask those individuals to leave so that Mackenzie's committee can meet with her separately, privately, so that they can have a further discussion about her thesis and make a final formal decision about whether or not she will be confirmed to candidacy. So that should cover all of the housekeeping. I'll also ask that you keep your microphones muted until she's finished presenting. At that time, if you have a question, you can either raise your hand, myself or Dr. Newcomer will call on you, or you may unmute yourself. And I just ask that you introduce yourself when you go to ask a question. So at this time, I will pass it over to the committee chair, Dr. Sean Newcomer.
All right, thanks, Matt. Welcome everybody to Mackenzie's thesis defense. I want to thank everybody for coming to this celebration of her research that she's done over the past 2 years as part of her master's thesis at CSU San Marcos. I first was introduced to Mackenzie in 2017 when she wandered into my my office one afternoon and was interested in participating in some surf research that we were doing at Cal State San Marcos. And as a former surfer, not professional, but competitive surfer, Mackenzie was quite interested in the research that we were doing and wanted to get involved as a new kinesiology student. Over the next 2 years, I got to work with her as an undergrad, both in the classroom and doing research. And she was quite productive as an undergraduate. She was a co-author on 3 research projects that she participated in as a researcher. And she was a first author on a research project that she ran as an undergraduate. So like I said, very, very productive, did really well in the classroom and also in the her research endeavors. In fact, I have to say as an undergraduate, probably the best undergraduate researcher I've ever had. I was sad to lose her when she graduated in 2017. She was getting ready to go on to PA school and was getting ready to take some classes for PA school. Lo and behold, we stayed in contact. 2 years later, she decided that she did not want to go to PA school and she actually wanted to pursue a master's degree and do research on apparel and in sports apparel. And so she decided to do a master's degree with us 2 years ago when she entered our program. Unfortunately, it was during COVID and we had, obviously, as you know, a lot of limitations to the types of research she could do. She decided on a project, which she'll be discussing today, looking at perception and thermal perception of surfers while they're surfing. This project, as she'll mention, she was able to recruit over 900 subjects, which is amazing during COVID and the times and the limitations she had. She was able to do this. One of the things I do also want to bring up is while she was getting her master's degree at CSU San Marcos, she was doing a dual master's degree or another master's degree at NC State, which she is currently still doing in textiles. So she's very diverse and has a very strong background in both exercise physiology, kinesiology, and now textiles. We were lucky, or she was lucky enough to land a job at Patagonia right before she finished her last semester at CSU San Marcos. So now she is currently an employee at Patagonia, which I know is her dream job, and she's very, very excited about that position. So I'll leave it there and let Mackenzie basically tell you about the research she did.
Yeah, and thank you, Dr. Newcomer, for that introduction and just for your mentorship and guidance throughout this whole process. I also just wanted to thank Dr. Nessler and Dr. Filingeri for their support and guidance as well. And then, as Sean mentioned, I was able to recruit 900 subjects for the study. So I just really want to thank the student interns that helped me collect the data. And that was Jasmine, Josh, Cody, Emily, Maggie, Kate, and Jenny. And without you all, there's no way I could have gotten that many subjects. So thank you. So today I will be presenting my thesis on the characterization of thermal perception in recreational surfers wearing wetsuits. I'm going to start off with a brief introduction, go into the purpose and hypothesis, methods, results, discussion, which includes future wetsuit design and some limitations, and then leave some time at the end for questions. So starting with the introduction, there are over 37 million surfers worldwide, and the sport is increasing in popularity every year. Surfers will utilize wetsuits as thermal barrier between the skin and the environment to protect them from cold water and air exposure. Wetsuits are primarily made from polychloroprene closed cell foam, and polychloroprene itself has both hydrophobic and insulating properties. Therefore, it helps reduce convective heat loss and allows surfers to maintain normothermia during a surf session. And while wetsuits do a pretty good job of insulating the surfer and help combat the negative effects of cold water and air, they don't fully block water and air from coming in contact with the skin, and heat loss still does occur. So that is shown here. So looking at the graph on the right, skin temperature is on the y-axis and time is on the x-axis, and each line represents an anatomical region studied. So heat loss, as measured by changes in skin temperature, occur across the body during the activity of surfing. And in both laboratory and in field studies, it has been reported that the greatest amount of heat loss during surfing occurs in the lower legs, with an absolute change in skin temperature of around 6 degrees Celsius, the thighs with a change of about 5 degrees, and then the lower abdomen with about a 4.5 degrees Celsius change. I also want to point out that the least amount of heat under the wetsuit occurred in the upper back and chest in these studies. And so this heterogeneous pattern of heat loss that occurs across the body during surfing may be attributed to the unique activity profile of surfing, which is shown here. So surfing involves different parts of the body moving in and out of the water at different rates. So only 6% of the time surfing is spent actually wave riding, and that's when the surfer is fully out of the water. 47% of time surfing is spent paddling, where the anterior portion of the body, the lower arms and the legs are being exposed to the water. 38% of the time is spent sitting or laying, where the legs, lower abdomen, and potentially lower arms are all being exposed to the water. And then lastly, about 9% of the time spent surfing is performing miscellaneous activities, such as duck diving, which is shown here, or falling. And then during those activities, that is the only time during surfing when the entire body is fully submerged underwater. So the unique activity profile of surfing results in this heterogeneous heat loss across the body and may make designing wetsuits that account for that variability in activity and water exposure challenging. So in addition to the physiological aspect, the perception and thermal comfort and sensation aspect while wearing a wetsuit is another important factor that should also be considered in wetsuit design, because it likely contributes to consumer satisfaction and wetsuit purchasing choices. So currently there is very limited data on thermal perception in aquatic athletes. The data that does exist suggests that wearing a wetsuit does improve thermal comfort, that regional differences in thermal comfort may exist between males and females wearing wetsuits. And lastly, that wetsuit material can influence thermal comfort. However, none of these studies provided much insight into if thermal perception of surfers wearing wetsuits aligned with previously published data on heat loss during surfing. So therefore, the purpose of this study was to characterize the perception of heat loss, comfort, and sensations in recreational surfers while wearing a wetsuit during surfing. And we hypothesized that the perception of heat loss, comfort, and sensation would align with previously reported skin temperature data during recreational surfing in a wetsuit. So moving into the methods. 903 male and female recreational surfers were recruited for this study. Study participants had to have had more than 1 year of surfing experience, and they had to be between the ages of 18 and 80 years old. And then the map on the right just shows areas in California where we collected data. This table shows characteristics and the surfing history of our study population. So I'm not going to go through all of this in much detail, but I did want to point out that there were more males than females in the study, and that the study population was made up of competent surfers, which is shown by the average years of surfing experience to be 17 years. And then the average hours per week our participants surfed was around 6 hours. Convenient sampling at beaches was utilized to recruit participants for the study. So potential participants were approached and recruited on the beach prior to them entering the water for their surf session. We informed the participants that we would be asking them a post-surf questionnaire, which I'll go through in a minute. And that was going to be asked of them immediately upon them returning to the beach. This way, we ensured that we would get the most accurate responses to our thermal comfort and sensation questions, as opposed to conducting an online survey. So the in-person survey was a big strength of the study. The participants wore their own self-selected wetsuits and then completed their surf session as normal. There was no minimum or maximum time requirement they had to surf, but the surf session began when the participant entered the water and ended when they exited the water. And total time spent surfing and environmental conditions were recorded. So now moving into the post-surf questionnaire, we first showed the participants a Borg rating of perceived exertion scale, which ranges from 6 to 20. We explained to the participants that 6 is like sitting on the couch at rest, and 20 is the hardest you've ever worked out in your life or maximal exertion. We asked the participants what number on that scale best corresponded to their perceived exertion during their surf session. Next, we showed the participants a thermal sensation visual analog scale, and we asked them to choose from -10 to 10, -10 being really cold, 0 being neither hot nor cold, and +10 being hot, what number best corresponded to how their whole body felt thermally during their surf session. We then showed the participants a thermal comfort visual analog scale and asked them to choose between the choices from very uncomfortable to very comfortable, how their whole body felt during their surf session. The next series of questions pertain to the participants' regional thermal comfort and sensations. So first, the participants were asked to identify what body region, only covered by their full wetsuit, felt the coldest, wettest, and most thermally uncomfortable during their surf session. So regions underneath the wetsuit included the upper arms, the armpits, lower arms, chest, abdomen, upper back, lower back, genitalia, upper legs, and lower legs. Therefore, the head, the hands, and feet were excluded from being chosen. And in addition, any wetsuit accessories, including booties, gloves, and hoods, were not considered to be part of the full suit. So participants were then asked to choose what body region underneath their wetsuit they wished was warmer, drier, and more thermally comfortable. If the participant didn't feel cold under their wetsuit, or they could not perceive any thermal sensation or their own thermal comfort, they were labeled as a non-responder. So next, the participants were asked the same series of 6 questions regarding regional thermal comfort and sensations, but now they could pick anywhere on their whole body. So that would be either covered or uncovered by the wetsuit, so including the head, the hands, and the feet, or anywhere covered by any wetsuit accessory like a hood, gloves, or booties. Participants were then asked about their wetsuit characteristics. So this included their wetsuit brand, model, and color, the mode of entry into the wetsuit, which are shown on the left here. So that could either be a chest zip, a back zip, or a zipperless wetsuit. The wetsuit thickness, size, and how old their wetsuit was, or any areas of leakage they might have in their wetsuit. So that could be a hole, a rip, or a seam split. And then we also asked if they wore any accessories during their session, including booties, gloves, or a hood. Participants were then asked about their surfing history. So this included their surfboard length, the number of years of surfing experience they had, the average hours per week they surfed, their hometown, and the number of years they lived in their respective geographical region. So that was either Northern, Central, or Southern California. And then lastly, participants were asked anthropometric questions, including their age, their sex. They estimated their height and mass and ethnicity. And then only women were asked questions pertaining to their menstrual cycle. So now for data management and analysis. So Microsoft Forms was used to conduct all survey data, and Microsoft Excel was used for the analysis. Analysis included frequency distributions based on the 12 regional thermal comfort and sensation questions. So moving into the results now. So starting with the surf activity and wetsuit characteristics, again, 903 participants were recruited for this study, and that included 735 males and 168 females. Their average length of surf session was around 80 minutes, and 47 different wetsuit brands were documented in this study. Average age of wetsuit was around 2 years old, and wetsuit entries included mostly chest zips, then back zips, then zipperless wetsuits. Wetsuit thicknesses were grouped into a thickness category. So the majority of the surfers, which was around 470, wore a wetsuit that had 3 millimeters or less of neoprene thickness. So that would include 3.2s, 3 millimeters, 2 millimeter wetsuits. And then around 370 surfers wore wetsuits that were greater than 3 millimeters of neoprene thickness, but less than 5 millimeters of thickness. So that would include 4.3 millimeter wetsuits or 4 millimeter wetsuits. And then lastly, 60 surfers wore wetsuits that were greater than 4 millimeters, but less or equal to 5 millimeters. So that would include 4 millimeter wetsuits. And here are all the averages for environmental conditions. So average ocean temperature was around 16.5 degrees Celsius. Mean swell height, interval, and direction was 0.8 meters at 13 seconds from 237 degrees. Average air temperature was around 17 degrees Celsius. Average wind speed and direction were about 7 kilometers per hour from 188 degrees. Humidity was on average 69%, and cloud coverage averaged to be around 50% during the surf sessions. So now moving on to session rating of perceived exertion and whole body thermal and whole body comfort and sensation questions. So average participant surf session rating of perceived exertion was 11, which corresponds to light on the Borg RPE scale. Average whole body thermal sensation was 0.8, which is on the warm side of the scale. And then average whole body thermal comfort was 1.5, which corresponds to halfway between just comfortable and comfortable on the scale. So now moving into regional differences in thermal comfort and sensations underneath the wetsuit. So data for regional differences in perceived thermal comfort and sensations are reported here as the frequency each body region was chosen for that given category. So the lighter the color means that region was less frequently reported by the study population, and the darker the color means that region was more frequently reported by the study population. So again, participants were deemed non-responders if they cannot perceive the locations of their own thermal comfort or sensations. So for each one of these categories, I'm going to highlight the top 4 most frequently reported anatomical regions for each category. So Starting on the left, the most frequently reported coldest region under the wetsuit was the chest and the lower legs with 15% reported frequency, followed by the lower arms with 12% and upper back at 9%. Now in the middle, surfers most frequently reported feeling thermally uncomfortable in the chest with 21% reported frequency, the upper back at 11% frequency, and then the lower legs with 9% and the lower arms with 7%. Moving to the right, surfers reported feeling the wettest under their wetsuit in their lower legs with 22% reported frequency. Then the chest was 17%, upper back 9%, and then the lower back with 8%. So now on the left, the most frequently reported region under the wetsuit where surfers wanted to be warmer were the chest with 19% frequency, the lower legs 12%, lower arms 8%, and then the back at 7%. Now in the middle, the most frequently reported region under the wetsuit where surfers wanted to be more thermally comfortable was the chest with 22%, the upper arms 10%, lower legs and upper back both had 9%. And then on the right, the most frequently reported region under the wetsuit where surfers wanted to be drier was the chest with 20% reported frequency, then the lower legs with 10%, the upper back with 8%, and then the remaining regions were reported 5% or less of the time. So now regional differences in thermal comfort and sensations on the whole body. And again, this could be areas covered or uncovered by the wetsuit or any wetsuit accessories. So starting on the left, the most frequently reported coldest region on the whole body were the feet with 46%, the hands 31%, head 11%, and chest at 3%. In the middle, the most frequently reported thermally uncomfortable regions on the whole body were the feet with 34% reported frequency, the hands 24%, head 10%, and then the chest 6%. And then on the right, the most frequently reported wettest region on the whole body was the head with 30% frequency, feet were 27%, hands 9%, and lower legs 7%. And then now starting on the left, surfers most frequently reported wanting to be warmer in their feet with 30% reported frequency. Hands were 18%, chest 11%, and head was 9%. In the middle, surfers reported wanting to be more thermally comfortable in their in their feet with 25%, the hands at 16%, the chest at 11%, and then the head at 10%. And then lastly, on the right, surfers most frequently reported wanting to be drier on their whole body, on their heads with 19% reported frequency, the chest at 10%, feet 9%, and then lower legs at 6%. So now moving into the discussion. So based on the data from this study, wetsuits do a pretty sufficient job insulating surfers during surfing. So evidence of this is shown by a mean whole body thermal sensation rating of 0.8, and participants reported feeling comfortable 86% of the time. So that means that the majority of participants reported feeling either very comfortable, or just comfortable during their surf session. And I also think it's really important, and I want to highlight and acknowledge that based on our perceptual data, that wetsuits that are currently on the market are doing a very good job of providing warmth and comfort for surfers during surfing. So when surfers did report feeling cold under their wetsuits, they reported the coldest regions to be located in the chest, the lower legs, the lower arms, and upper back. And just as a reminder, based on the physiological studies measuring heat loss, surfers lose the most heat in their lower legs, thighs, lower abdomen, and forearms. And in fact, the chest and the upper back were the two warmest regions under the wetsuit. So when comparing our current perceptual data to the previous physiological data, the lower legs and the lower arms are in alignment, but the upper back and chest don't align. Therefore, our results don't fully support our hypothesis that surfers would feel the coldest under their wetsuit in anatomical locations that have been previously reported to have the greatest heat loss during surfing. And so while the mechanisms underlying the regional differences in cold perception can't be determined from the design of the current study, Based on the locations where surfers felt the coldest under their wetsuit, we speculated that the infiltration of water into the wetsuit may play a significant role. The 4 most frequently reported regions under the wetsuit surfers report being the coldest: the chest, lower legs, lower arms, and upper back are all near access points in the wetsuit. And those would be at the ankle, the wrist, the neck, and the neck cuffs where water may enter. And in addition, zippers that are used in current wetsuit design are permeable to water, and their location may have played a role in the thermal discomfort reported in the chest and upper back during surfing. In this study, the majority of surfers wore chest zip wetsuits, around 600, or back zip wetsuits, which was around 200. We speculated that water permeable zippers in the chest and the upper back of the wetsuit allowed additional water to move into the wetsuit, increase the sensations of cold, discomfort, and wetness as water interacted with the chest and upper back regions. Our data shows that out of the 600 people wearing chest zips, 16% of those subjects reported being coldest in the chest. Out of the 200 people wearing back zips, 15% of those subjects reported feeling coldest in the upper back. And out of the 85 participants wearing zipperless suits, 10.5 of those participants reported feeling coldest in the chest and 12% in the upper back. These findings suggest that water infiltration through both the zippers and the wetsuit access points likely contribute to the perception of cold while surfing in a wetsuit. And then therefore future studies should look to assess and measure the actual amount of water that infiltrates through the neck and zippers in order to better understand these discrepancies between the previously reported skin temperature data and then the current perceptual data. And furthermore, future wetsuit design could potentially have an impact on thermal comfort and sensation if novel zippers that are impermeable to water were incorporated into wetsuits, and if access points at the wrist, the lower legs, and neck were altered to allow less water infiltration into the wetsuit. So evidence of this idea comes from a study that used simple cuffing techniques with a Velcro strap on the wrist that limited the amount of water that could infiltrate at the wrist access point of the wetsuit. And this significantly increased skin temperatures in the forearms. So now moving on to whole body thermal perception. So not surprisingly, when comparing parts of the body that were covered or uncovered by the wetsuit, surfers reported feeling the coldest, most uncomfortable, and wettest in anatomical regions that were not covered by the wetsuit. So again, that was the feet, the hands, and the head. So out of the 903 participants, almost half of the study population, 45%, reported the feet as the coldest region on their entire body, but only 23% of total participants chose to wear booties. In addition, around 30% of the study population reported their hands as the coldest region, but only 2% of the whole study population chose to actually wear gloves. 11% of our study population reported their head as the coldest region, but only 12% of the total study population chose to wear a hood. So even though surfers have access to wetsuit accessories like booties, gloves, and hoods that may reduce heat loss and aid in their thermal comfort, the vast majority of surfers are choosing not to wear these pieces of equipment and would rather expose their bare skin to the environment, which makes these regions become cold, wet, and uncomfortable. So we speculated that the reason for why these pieces of equipment are not utilized may be because the surfers are perceiving them to not work, or they're not comfortable, or they may be limiting surfing performance. So that idea is supported by the fact that out of the 23% of participants who wore booties, 20% of those subjects still report their feet as being the coldest, most uncomfortable, and wettest region on the whole body. And then out of those who chose to wear gloves, 40% still reported their hands as the coldest region, 26% reported them as being the most uncomfortable, and 22% reported them feeling the wettest. And then lastly, out of those who chose to wear hoods, 14% still reported their heads as the coldest region, 15% as the most uncomfortable, and 20% as feeling the wettest. So I just really want to emphasize that out of the people who are wearing these accessories, there's a large segment of them who are still saying that these areas are still cold, wet, and uncomfortable in their current state, and that these accessories might not be working. So future research should look at why surfers are choosing not to wear these pieces of surfing equipment that may aid in thermal comfort. And in addition, since the majority of consumers are choosing not to wear booties, gloves, or hoods, future wetsuit accessories design should focus on how to make these pieces of equipment more comfortable and usable to aid in thermal regulation and performance. So more specifically, the feet are the only point of contact between the surfer and the surfboard while wave riding. So if internal muscle temperatures in the feet decrease, then surfing performance will also most likely become impacted. So it seems like there's a lot of potential in future booty design to aid in surfing performance. I just want to finish up the presentation with some limitations of the current study. So again, the study is very descriptive in nature, which makes it challenging to make clear mechanisms underlying the subject's responses to our survey questions. Additionally, this was a very large scale field study, and we were unable to control for many variables like wetsuit design or environmental conditions that may impact thermal comfort and sensations. So that could be water temperature, air temperature, wind speed, wetsuit thickness. But we definitely took these variables into consideration and collected them for descriptive purposes. So when the data was divided and analyzed by water temperatures greater or less than the average water temperature of 16.5 degrees Celsius, air temperatures greater or less than 17 degrees Celsius, wind speeds greater or less than 7.5 kilometers per hour, or wetsuit thicknesses greater or less than 4 millimeters of thickness, surfers still felt cold, wet, and uncomfortable in the same 4 regions under their wetsuit. So the chest, lower legs, and upper back, and lower arms. And so while this study only looked to characterize thermal perception and has limitations in its ability to deduce any driving mechanisms behind surfers, why they feel cold, wet, and uncomfortable, it does provide a solid framework for any future studies that are done in a more controlled and focused environment that could focus on looking at specific variables like water temperature or wetsuit design. So these future studies will allow us to better understand how surf apparel design may impact thermal comfort and sensation. And then thanks for everyone for listening, and I am happy to answer any questions.
All right, nice job, Mackenzie. So now what we'll do is open up to any questions. You can either unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can type it into the chat, and Dr. Schubert will read those questions to Mackenzie.
All right, Mackenzie, you have a question from Tyler. Your average board size is basically a mid-length board. Would you expect your results to change if compared between short and long boarders? And if so, why?
Yes, that is a good question. Yeah, it averaged to be a mid-length board. I would assume, so a shorter board, you're going to have more parts of your body submerged in the water. So with less volume, you might be sinking more in the water. So those regions of the body, like the lower legs or abdomen or chest, might interact more with water. So you would lose more heat. And then in a longer board, like a longboard, you're going to be out of the water more because the board has more volume. So you might not be interacting as much with the water. So with a longboard, maybe only your lower arms would be submerged versus the lower half of your body. So just based on thermal conductivity and heat loss, I would say people on shorter boards would be losing more heat than people on longer boards. So yes, I would say that there could be differences there. Whether or not they could perceive them is that would be something that to look at. And then again, that could be a future study of looking at the perceptual differences between long border and short borders.
All right, well, I'm not seeing a lot of questions from the audience. So I'd like to thank everybody for coming to Mackenzie's defense here. And what we'll do now is ask you to leave this defense, and we will close this down and have the committee members start asking questions of Mackenzie. So thank you.